We all have gaps in our family history. Maybe you don't know much about your great-great-grandmother. You might have her name, a birth date, a death date, but you don't know what she was really like. You don't know what she cared about, what she feared, or how she spent her days. There is a person-shaped hole in your story. You can see the people who came before her and the people who came after. But she is a mystery. Now imagine that gap wasn't one person. Imagine it was a million years long. And imagine it wasn't just a gap in your family tree, but in the family tree of every human alive. That's exactly what we have in our evolutionary history. It's a huge, frustrating, and fascinating blank spot. It sits right at the most important moment in our story, the birth of our own genus, Homo. This gap falls roughly between 3 million and 2 million years ago. Before the gap, the main characters on the stage were creatures called australopithecines. You've probably heard of the most famous one, Lucy. She was a member of the species Australopithecus afarensis. After the gap, a new kind of creature appears. This one is different. It has a bigger brain, a flatter face, and it's doing something revolutionary. It's making stone tools. This is the first member of our own group, Homo, specifically Homo habilis. So we have a clear before and after. Before, a successful, small-brained, upright walking ape. After, a bigger-brained, tool-making early human. The transition from one to the other is arguably the most critical step in our entire 6 million year journey from a common ancestor with chimpanzees. And it happened inside that million-year black box. What went on in there? Why is the fossil record so quiet during this pivotal time? And what pressures could have been so intense that they forged a new kind of being? To understand the mystery of the gap, we first have to understand who was standing at its edge. Let's look at the before picture. For millions of years, the australopithecines were the stars of the African landscape. They weren't a single species, but a whole group of related hominins. Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, lived from about 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago. They were a fantastic success story. What were they like? Picture a creature about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They had long arms and short legs, a bit like a chimpanzee. But they had a crucial human-like trait: they walked on 2 legs. We know this for sure. Their pelvic bones, their leg bones, and even fossilized footprints they left behind in volcanic ash at a place called Laetoli tell us they were bipedal. This was a huge deal. Walking upright freed up their hands. It allowed them to see over tall grass and travel more efficiently over long distances. But from the neck up, they were still very ape-like. Their faces jutted forward. And their brains were small. The brain of an australopithecine was about the size of a modern chimpanzee's brain, maybe a little bigger. Around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters. For comparison, your brain is about 1,400 cubic centimeters. Their small brains tell us something important. They were likely smart, like chimps are smart. They could probably solve problems, use simple tools like sticks or stones they found, and live in complex social groups. But they weren't thinking like us. They weren't designing tools to a specific pattern. They weren't planning for the distant future. They lived in a world that was different from today's Africa. It was generally wetter and more wooded. They thrived in these mosaic environments, a mix of woodlands and patches of savanna. Their diet reflected this. They ate fruits, nuts, seeds, roots, and maybe insects, or the occasional small lizard. Their big, grinding molars tell us they were well adapted for a tough plant-based diet. They were a brilliantly adapted creature, perfectly suited to their time and place. They were not some clunky missing link waiting to become human. They were a success in their own right. They lasted for millions of years, far longer than we Homo sapiens have been around so far. So, as we approach the edge of our million-year gap around 3 million years ago, the landscape is full of different kinds of australopithecines. They are experienced survivors, masters of their world, but their world was about to change in a big way. And this change would set the stage for one of the greatest vanishing acts in prehistory. The Earth's climate doesn't stay still. It wobbles in its orbit, it tilts on its axis. These long, slow cycles create ice ages and warm periods. Around 3 million years ago, the world began a long-term cooling and drying trend. In Africa, this had a dramatic effect. The reliable rains became less reliable. The lush woodlands and forests that the Australopithecines loved began to shrink. In their place, vast, open grasslands and savannas began to spread across the continent. This was a catastrophe for specialists. If you are perfectly adapted to eating forest fruits, and the forest disappears, you have a problem. The old rules for survival were being torn up. The old, reliable food sources were becoming scarce. The environment was now full of new challenges. The open savanna offered new opportunities, like herds of grazing animals. but it was also more dangerous. There was nowhere to hide from big predators like saber-toothed cats or giant hyenas. This changing world is the backdrop for our mystery. It's the crucible in which a new kind of hominin would be forged. The selective pressures were immense. It was a classic evolutionary challenge: adapt or die out. Some australopithecines did adapt by becoming super specialized. A group known as the robust australopithecines, or paranthropus, evolved. They developed enormous jaws and massive chewing muscles. They had huge flat molars for grinding up the toughest, most fibrous roots and tubers on the savanna. They were the ultimate nutcrackers. It was one way to solve the problem, but it was not our way. Another group took a different path. Instead of developing specialized bodies, they began to develop a specialized brain. This is where the trail goes cold. The fossil record from about 3 million to 2 million years ago is incredibly sparse. It's not that there's nothing. We have a few scraps, a piece of a jaw here, a few teeth there. But we don't have a clear sequence of skulls and skeletons that shows a neat, gradual transition. It's like watching a movie where a key scene has been cut out. We see Lucy's kind, and then a million years later, we see something startlingly new. Let's jump across the gap and look at the after picture. Around 2 million years ago, the evidence becomes clearer again. And we meet Homo habilis, the handyman. The first fossils of this species were found alongside simple but effective stone tools. This was a game changer. These weren't just any old rocks. They were deliberately chosen stones carried from one place to another and then intentionally shaped. By striking one rock with another, these early humans could create a sharp edge. This technology, called the Oldowan tool industry, was simple but revolutionary. A sharp stone flake can do things that teeth and fingernails cannot. It can slice through thick animal hide. It can scrape meat off a bone. It can break open a long bone to get at the rich fatty marrow inside. This opened up a whole new world of food, and when we look at Homo habilis itself, we see other changes. Its face was a bit flatter than an australopithecines. Its teeth were smaller, especially the back molars. This suggests a change in diet. It was eating softer foods or processing its food with tools before eating it. But the most important change was inside its skull. The brain of Homo habilis was around 600 to 700 cubic centimeters. That's a significant jump from the 400 to 500 cc of Lucy. It's still only half the size of a modern human brain, but it's a huge leap in the right direction. It represents a massive investment in a very expensive organ. A bigger brain needs more energy. And it seems they found that energy in meat and marrow. So, the contrast is stark. We go from a bipedal ape eating mainly plants to a bipedal early human with a bigger brain, smaller teeth, making stone tools and eating meat. All the key ingredients that would define our lineage, big brains, technology, and a flexible diet appear on the scene right after this million-year gap. The question is, how did we get from A to B? What happened in the darkness? Before we get to the theories, it's worth asking why the gap exists at all. Why is the fossil record so unhelpful at this specific time? It's not a conspiracy. The Earth is just very good at erasing its own history. Fossilization is an incredibly rare event. An animal has to die in the right place, be buried quickly by sediment before it's eaten or scattered, and then the surrounding rock has to survive millions of years of geological pressure, erosion, and shifting continents without being destroyed. Finally, some lucky paleoanthropologist has to be looking in the right place at the right time when it finally erodes back to the surface. The odds are astronomically against any single bone surviving. The area where most of these discoveries are made, the East African Rift Valley, is a geologically chaotic place. It's a tear in the Earth's crust. Over millions of years, there have been periods of intense volcanic activity, lake formation, and erosion. It's possible that the specific layers of rock corresponding to our million-year gap were either eroded away completely or are buried so deep that we haven't found them yet. We are at the mercy of geology. The fossil record is like a book, with most of its pages ripped out. We have to reconstruct the story from the few surviving sentences. So with this patchy evidence, scientists have to come up with hypotheses. These are educated guesses based on the clues we do have, and there are several big ideas about what drove the transition from Australopithecus to Homo. The most popular and well-supported idea is often called the Savanna Hypothesis. It's the idea we touched on earlier. The changing climate was the main driver. The shift from a wooded environment to an open savanna was the problem that our ancestors had to solve. This hypothesis is powerful because it connects all the dots. In an open grassland, walking on two legs becomes even more advantageous. It's a more energy-efficient way to cover the long distances between scattered food and water sources. It also helps you see predators from farther away. But the food problem was the big one. The old, reliable fruits and leaves were gone. What was left? Tough roots and tubers and animals. Here's where the bigger brain comes in. A bigger brain allows for more complex problem solving. How do you get to the tubers buried underground? Maybe you need a digging stick. How do you deal with a dead zebra you find on the plains when you don't have claws or big canine teeth? You need a tool. The invention of the stone tool was a cognitive leap. It required foresight, finding the right kind of rock, knowing how to strike it, and understanding what the resulting sharp edge could be used for. This led to a powerful feedback loop. Tools allowed access to meat and marrow. Meat and marrow are incredibly high energy, calorie-dense foods. This new, rich diet provided the fuel needed to power a bigger, energy-hungry brain. A bigger brain, in turn, could invent better tools and more complex hunting or scavenging strategies, which led to getting more meat, which fueled an even bigger brain. This loop of diet, tools, and brain size is probably the engine that drove our evolution during that missing million years. The Savanna Hypothesis paints a compelling picture. Our ancestors were forced out of their comfortable, wooded homes onto the challenging new savanna. This new environment selected for intelligence, tool use, and cooperation. It turned a clever ape into an aspiring human. It's a story of challenge and response, of crisis leading to innovation. Most of the evidence we have fits this general picture. The timing of the climate change, the appearance of tools, and the changes in hominin anatomy all line up. But there are other ideas too. Some are more speculative. One of the most famous and most controversial is the aquatic ape hypothesis. This idea suggests that our ancestors didn't move onto the savanna, but instead went through a phase of living in and around water in flooded forests, along coastlines, or in river deltas. The proponents of this theory point to a number of human traits that are unusual for land-based primates. For example, our lack of dense body hair. It's a better insulator in water than in air. Our thick layer of subcutaneous fat, which is much more like the blubber of a seal than the fat of a chimpanzee, could have provided insulation in water. Our ability to consciously control our breathing, which is essential for swimming and diving. Our downward pointing nostrils, which are good for keeping water out. Even our bipedalism, the theory goes, could have started as a way to wade in deeper water to find food. The aquatic ape hypothesis is intriguing because it seems to explain a lot of odd things about us in one neat package. The problem? There is absolutely zero fossil evidence to support it. None. Our hominin fossils are found in environments that were woodlands or savannas, not ancient coastlines. While it's a creative idea, it's not taken seriously by most scientists in the field because it's a story without any physical proof from the past. Science relies on evidence, and in this case, the evidence just isn't there. A more mainstream and compelling idea is the social brain hypothesis. This theory proposes that the primary driving force behind our growing brains wasn't the physical environment, but the social environment. It wasn't about outsmarting a leopard, it was about outsmarting the other guy in your group. As hominin groups became larger and more complex, a new kind of intelligence became critical. You had to be able to keep track of a lot of social information. Who is your ally? Who is your rival? Who owes you a favor? Who is cheating the system? You need to be able to cooperate, to form coalitions, to deceive, and to detect deception in others. This requires a huge amount of mental processing power. Think about it. Living in a complex social world is like playing a multi-dimensional chess game every single day. The individuals with slightly better social intelligence, the ones who could build stronger alliances and better predict the behavior of others, would have been more successful. They would have had more access to resources and more opportunities to reproduce. Their genes for a bigger, better social brain would have been passed on. This creates another powerful feedback loop. As brains get bigger, social groups can become even more complex, and as social groups get more complex, the pressure for even bigger brains increases. This cognitive arms race within our own species could have been a powerful engine for brain expansion. It helps explain why our brains grew so large so quickly. A simple need to find more food on the savanna might not be enough to explain the tripling of brain size that would eventually happen in our lineage. But the ever-escalating complexity of social life might be. Of course, these theories don't have to be mutually exclusive. It's very unlikely that there was just one single cause for the birth of Homo. The truth is probably a messy combination of all these pressures. The most likely scenario is that it all happened at once. Imagine it like this. The climate changed, as described in the Savanna Hypothesis. This was the external pressure. It forced our ancestors into a new environment with new problems. This created the need for a new solution. The solution involved several parts. It involved new technology, stone tools. It involved a new diet, more meat. And it involved new social strategies. Perhaps to survive on the dangerous savanna, our ancestors had to form larger, more cooperative groups. A lone hominin would be easy prey. A group of them, perhaps brandishing sticks or throwing rocks, would be more formidable. But living in these larger groups brought its own set of challenges, the ones described by the social brain hypothesis. You needed a bigger brain to navigate the new social complexities. The new high-energy diet of meat and marrow made possible by tools provided the fuel for that bigger brain. So you have a perfect storm of evolutionary pressures. An environmental crisis forces a change in behavior. This new behavior tool-making and group cooperation requires a bigger brain. And the new diet, meat, makes that bigger brain possible. Everything is connected. The environment, technology, diet, social structure, and anatomy all evolve together, pushing each other forward. This complex interplay of factors is what likely happened in that dark million-year gap. It wasn't one single thing, it was everything, all at once. We are still finding clues. Every few years, a new fossil is discovered that adds a little more detail to the picture. In 2015, a 2.8 million-year-old jawbone was found in Ethiopia. It has features that look a bit like an australopithecus and a bit like an early Homo. It sits right at the beginning of our gap. It's not a full skeleton, but it's a tantalizing hint. It suggests that the origins of our genus might be older than we thought, pushing the story deeper into the gap. Other discoveries show that tool use might also be older. At one site, scientists found 3.3 million-year-old stone tools. They are even cruder than the Oldowan tools, and they predate the first known Homo fossils. Who made them? We don't know for sure. It might have been a late surviving species of australopithecines. This suggests that tool making wasn't a sudden invention of our genus, but perhaps an older behavior that our ancestors co-opted and perfected. So what happened in the million-year gap? The honest answer is that we still don't know for sure. We don't have the smoking gun, we don't have a beautiful, complete fossil series showing the gradual transformation. What we have are fragments, clues, and powerful theories. The story we can tell is one of a world in crisis and of a resourceful lineage of apes that faced a choice. One branch, the robust australopithecines, chose the path of physical specialization, evolving into grinding machines. They held on for another million years or so, but their path was an evolutionary dead end. They eventually went extinct. Our branch chose a different path. It was the path of the generalist. Instead of evolving a specialized body, we evolved a specialized mind. We began to solve problems not with our teeth, but with our brains and our hands. We outsourced our digestion to sharp rocks. We outsourced our defense to group cooperation. We became the creature that adapts not by changing its body, but by changing its behavior. We invented technology, we built culture. That million-year gap is the silent, murky period where this fundamental shift happened. It's when our ancestors made the fateful bet on intelligence. They traded the brute force of specialized anatomy for the infinite flexibility of a curious, problem-solving mind. Everything that makes us human, from our language and art to our science and technology, has its deepest roots in the choices and struggles that took place during that mysterious time. It's the missing chapter of our origin story, and while we may never fill in every detail, the search for answers tells us the most important thing of all about ourselves, that we are the descendants of the ones who, when faced with a changing world, learned to think their way out.